Hi, everybody. My name's Emma. This is my story. It's about making mistakes. Well, we all make mistakes, don't we? We have delusions in ourselves and people and in our values. My story is also about understanding yourself, because if you do, you'll never betray yourself. Well, I guess it all started with my new foster family. Mr. and Mrs. Smith adopted me. They also had 3 charming kids who were adopted, just like me. But in fact, this story started much earlier, from the moment I understood myself and my life. When I realized whom I was and where I was, I had a plan in my head. Well, I was always a smart girl. I was too young when I learned to read and understand smart books. I also liked to listen to other people. Thus, step by step, using my cunning, childish, naive face and some manipulations, I became kinda boarding school leader. Since I was 6, I started to make my way into my bright future. And I used the most dishonest and dirty methods. I blackmailed, lied, looking straight into the eyes of the teachers. The only thing inaccessible to me was fighting, but I didn't really want to. Still, I was a fragile girl, not a brutal man. Thanks to my appearance and developed brain, I became popular with the boys. Even if other kids accused me of different terrible things, the teachers always believed me, without any hesitation. Very soon other kids realized it was no use to mess with me. The cute little girl face, in fact, was a really scary opponent. I mean it. When the 2 high school students who had messed with me got to the police because of me, I just gutted their bags of various bad pills. I was completely left behind. I had my own room, lots of cool toys from my foster parents, nice clothes that I chose from the best Instagram shops. Other kids didn't even have half of what I had. I think my best talent was to negotiate. Yeah, and everyone would give up, seeing a cute little girl. I used it for my own purposes. The only thing that poisoned my life was this terrible thought. I was so wonderful, talented, and sweet, but why was I abandoned by my biological parents? Well, it's obvious that every abandoned kid has a dad and mom somewhere, but where are my parents? I couldn't figure out no matter how hard I tried. My foster parents said I was found as a baby on the porch of the shelter. It was unpleasant to know this. And it was even more painful when I heard other kids sing how wonderful it was to grow up in a family. That's how I decided to try it on my own. I wasn't very good at reading people back then, and an elderly rich couple seemed to me quite a suitable option. Despite the fact that they already had a kid, a nasty-looking kid, who was a couple of years older than me. So, the boarding school administration gave me to them as I asked. They arranged all the documents and I was adopted. But soon I realized this was a kinda scary fairy tale. I didn't want to be Cinderella, especially since I liked villains in fairy tales more. And here, I had to spend my time and talents trying to please these terrible people. As it turned out, they didn't take the orphan out of their kind heart. They just wanted to somehow stand out in front of their neighbors. They saw my foster parents had an adopted kid, whom they showed love and affection. But somehow, they didn't see I was kinda a servant to them. My new brother was a worst one for me. He made me bring him things, locked me in my room, blamed me for the broken plates and expensive vases. Of course, my foster parents believed only him, and even my gift of persuasion was no use here. They just didn't care. Anyway, at first, I just snapped. But they scolded me, so I started behaving in a more cunning way. During the next visit to the guardianship authorities, I gave myself bruises on my arms and feet, and then, with tears in my eyes, I told everyone how I was being bullied by my foster parents. Of course, I was immediately taken away from this terrible house, and there was nothing left of the perfect reputation of those people. Well, I had an unforgettable experience. Since then, the dreams of living in a family somehow disappeared from my head. There were a lot of other foster parents trying to adopt me, but I always refused, remembering how my previous foster parents treated me. Well, anyway, it turned out the boarding school was the coolest place for me to stay. Only at 16, I realized I was ready. It was time to get out of this swamp. And that's when the Smiths appeared in my life. I wasn't born yesterday. So, as soon as I realized I wanted to try living in a family again, I put all my energy into an active surveillance and studying the biographies of those people, wanting to become my new family. I needed the perfect parents. Moderately rich, moderately responsible, and, well, a little bit crazy, because I didn't like boring people. I didn't expect any love from them. I just wanted to live in a normal family where I could get the things I needed. And the Smiths seemed the appropriate candidates for me at first. They had an expensive car. They were impeccably dressed. And another advantage was they wanted to have a teenager in the family, not a toddler. Their gift for me was the money. And this was crucial, because it showed they really respected the freedom of choice. I played my part as a sweet good girl like clockwork. All the boarding school teachers were very happy their nice girl would go now to a good family after that story. They all praised me, showed my awards and academic performance. They told the Smiths how great I was, how smart I was, and anyway, I was just the best of the best. Well, I smiled, lowered my eyes to the floor, blushing, and confirmed how wonderful and obedient I was. And the Smiths loved me. They didn't even talk to other kids. They just asked me if I really wanted to be in their family. I did. So they signed the necessary papers, and just in a couple of hours, they took me home. But I missed one important thing. The Smiths came together to the boarding school, but my previous experience showed me that future guardians took all their family members with them. And I thought, but I failed to check it, that I would be their first and only kid. I had a surprise waiting for me in my new home. 3 other kids. 2 girls my age, with the same naive eyes as mine, and a boy who was a couple of years younger. My new brother and sisters. By the way, the girls were twins, and I understood at once they couldn't be trusted. It was a nightmare. The only thing that comforted me, somehow, was that the 3 of them were adopted kids like me. They'd been adopted by the Smith family not so long ago. The girls had 2 years of experience, and the boy 3. The Smith's house was large and beautiful, but it somehow turned out that the twins and I had to share a room, though I knew there were 3 extra bedrooms in the house, not counting the 2 guest rooms that kids weren't allowed to go into. That's where the grandparents stayed if they visited. The issue with my placement was immediately resolved. I wasn't even allowed to say a word. My new dad, Mr. Smith, or Ethan, just dragged an extra bed from somewhere and moved my suitcase to the shared closet. This event took place under my silent hysteria. But with my new clothes and other girlish little things, it wasn't so easy. Mom Jessica looked at my wardrobe, then looked in the girls' closet, nodded at something, and decided that our things would now be shared by all 3 of us. That's when I suddenly wanted to go back to the boarding school. However, the girls who immediately alerted me turned out to be really simple and naive, and happily dumped all their belongings in front of me. Like, take whatever you want. I wanted to scream, and I didn't want to wear anything worn by somebody else. At all. But nobody asked me. My parents were also caught in a trick, but at least I wasn't mistaken in their assessment. On the whole, they didn't really care about the kids. This was another typical story. They tried to improve their social status using orphans. 4 foster kids meant a perfect reputation, and what's more, monetary allowances for Mom Jessica. She turned out to be a business lady, and foster kids greatly reduced the amount of taxes she had to pay. Dad Ethan didn't notice the kids at all. There was only one rule in the house that was always followed. Never go into his workshop. Never ever. I mean it. Dad Ethan was an artist. He created his masterpieces in his workshop studio. By the way, they were quite good as I could judge. But anyway, he didn't care what happened in the rest of the house. Despite all these disadvantages, I can't really say the Smiths were bad parents. No, they did something really. They didn't bully us or force us to do anything we couldn't. They never scolded us. Mom Jessica even managed to pamper us and encourage us to have proper behavior. In some way, they were really the perfect foster parents I wanted for so long. Anyway, all I had to do was follow a few simple rules. Never go into the workshop. Always do your homework. Keep your room clean. Well, and don't make any noise when Mom Jessica is taking a nap on the couch. But this was more like a polite request. I would live happily ever after there, if it weren't for my 3 other relatives. Well, for some reason, they all thought I was their leader, and they all followed me like sheep following a shepherd. It was easy to make friends with them. I just showed them a couple of tricks from our boarding school to have some fun, like breaking the locks and stealing food from the refrigerator unnoticed. I also taught the girls to make perfect braids, and that's it. Now we seem to be friends forever, but I'm used to being alone. I loved solitude, quiet evenings with a book in my hands, and empty space in my room. But these guys just wouldn't leave me alone for a second. My things were always in perfect order, and the girls threw their stuff wherever they wanted, including my half of the room. It was difficult for me to be friends with them, because I always considered my peers stupid and limited, and my new relatives only confirmed my theory, not noticing I didn't want to communicate with them at all. Plus, my parents always reminded me I wasn't alone anymore, as if I had no one letting me forget about it. But the annoying thing was, I couldn't go back to the boarding school, and there was no guarantee the next family wouldn't be worse. But here, everything was perfect on the whole, except for the increased sociability and responsibility. But I just had to adapt and use my talents to the maximum. After a week of living at such a madhouse, with 3 stupid kids and parents who were mistaken for a family, I realized it was time to take things into my own hands. If the parents don't care, and the kids only knew how to look at people with innocent eyes and just nod, it made sense for me to make a plan. I urgently needed to get rid of the extra kids. I wanted to make sure all this stupid crowd of kids would get away from me. I knew this issue wouldn't be solved by itself, so I had to set a goal and go for it. And if I couldn't do anything in a perfect way, I just had to wait and do what was needed. I even knew where to start. William. The younger brother was the weakest link in the system. He was naive enough to fall into my trap, and curious enough for the adults to believe he did everything by himself. I also dared to take a spare room and use my parents' money. Perfect. For me, of course. I only had to wait for the right moment, and evening, Ethan's workshop, and William went there without permission. And I'll have my own room, and maybe even some other bonuses. So, hello everyone. If you haven't watched the previous episode yet, make sure you watch it. I'm Emma, and today I have big plans ahead of me to get rid of my stepbrother. As I said, Dad Ethan absolutely forbade us to enter his workshop studio. In my opinion, this rule applied not only to the kids, but also to Mom Jessica. When Mr. Smith came out of his sanctuary, he put a large and beautiful lock on the door. He carried the key around his neck, over his paint-smeared vest. Since one of my talents was observation, I noticed William hanging around the workshop 3 times during the first week of my arrival. Once he was chased away by Jessica. Then Chloe and Danny knocked him down almost under the door. The 3rd time the boy almost looked inside. But it turned out Dad Ethan was there and chased him away. I suspected William did this quite often. Apparently, his curiosity was stronger than his common sense. If you really want to know what was going on in the workshop, why not just use the window? What's the point of breaking through the door? Honestly, I managed to get into the studio, and there was nothing special there, except a bunch of canvases and paints. But his curiosity was only for my benefit. I had already taken the first step when I showed the boy how to break the locks in a right way. And then, well, he tried, yes, and he was caught, thanks to me. Actually, my plan was simple and totally logical. When the girls went outside, and my mom and dad went to the store, I quietly opened the lock to the workshop. I'm a lock-breaking master, yeah. And I imitated forced entry. I messed up the paint, dropped a couple of finished works in the stains on the floor, and slightly ruined the new paint in the easel. I felt sorry in some way because Dad was a really talented artist, and this work was supposed to be exhibited in a gallery. Besides, in my family, the order of things meant money. But something always has to be sacrificed. This time, art had to suffer. I also left a couple of Easter egg tracks just to make sure everyone believed my little brother was guilty. So, I did exactly what William would have done if he hadn't been so crooked. The boy was quietly playing a game console in his room. And according to the legend, I was somewhere around in the neighborhood that time, and I appeared at home again unnoticed. In fact, I even left before my parents on purpose. Thus, I worked out an alibi for myself. And I even managed to say hello to our neighbors, so that they could see me. Just in case. Perfect. I got out of the house through the same window I'd come in through, and hid in the bushes until the Smith's car pulled into the yard. Then I went inside with them, and while the parents were busy in the kitchen, I went up to the 2nd floor, stomping to attract attention. Then I screamed, loudly. Everyone immediately came running to my cry, even the girls from the street, and they saw exactly what I needed. The open door, the chaos, and the ruined work of Dad Ethan. And then it was no big deal to set William up. While my dad was worried and desperate, my mom quickly asked all the kids about where they were. They immediately revealed William had stayed home the whole time. Of course, they suspected him, despite him saying he was just sitting in his room. Then, I showed my mom the traces, a small footprint of William's shoe, a handkerchief that he always carried in his pocket, lying on the floor in front of the easel, paint stains on the boy's sweater. Here, I had to quickly smear his sweater, while everyone was jostling in the hallway. That's it. Moriarty had finished his job. Now it's Sherlock's turn. Of course, no one believed William. As punishment, he was deprived of sweets and pocket money. Ethan also warned him if this happened again, the boy would be returned to the boarding school. Well, I didn't expect it to be done right away. The main thing was that the first step to a quarrel turned out to be loud and effective. But I was more fortunate. As a reward for my talent for reading footprints, they moved me to one of the guest bedrooms. To be exact, I was asked to choose the room I wanted, and I said I don't have enough personal space. and they gave me the biggest one. Along with the room, I also got William's pocket money. I was finally able to buy new clothes and things that would only be mine. The funny thing was that no one suspected me of what had happened. My parents immediately believed it was all William's fault. The twins didn't doubt it either. The brother really could have done it. William might have wanted to say something, but no one would listen to him. William was no longer our favorite boy. Nobody trusted him as much as before. But it was too early for me to relax, because the twins were next in line. I had to work with the girls because they had a perfect reputation. I mean 100%. They were obedient, quiet, cute, and perfect girls, as if they weren't human beings, but kind of robots or something. They always did what parents asked them and never argued. But I knew I had to try, and I could do it. If I couldn't catch them playing pranks at home, then I'd be lucky at school. But I still didn't know how to get to them there. Then it turned out I would have 1,000,001 chances to watch the twins at school. Because after the holidays, I wouldn't go back to my old school. I would go to the same class with the girls. As my mom said, isn't it wonderful that you won't have to be separated? Yeah, things were going to be too simple. I didn't have to hope that Danny and Chloe were popular and cool at school. Losers. Yeah, they were losers. This was evident from their behavior and lifestyle. This meant I had a new item in my plan. How could I make it so that I would still be cool, and nobody would notice these cuties were my sisters? Knowing their character, they would continue to stick to me at school, which meant I would have to forget about my popularity right away. Everyone would say, "Hey, look, this newbie has loser sisters." But I wouldn't be me if I didn't invent a perfect plan to get rid of them once and for all. It was a good thing I had a whole week for my idea. Classes started in just 7 days. It was vital for me to know the twins wouldn't poke their noses into my future brilliant studies. I remembered what it was like to be a loser at the boarding school. I definitely didn't want to repeat the fate of those who didn't get lucky with brains. You know, losers don't get good grades. They don't get better places in school clubs and teams. They don't get popular. And if you're unlucky, then everyone would try to knock you down in front of the teachers. Of course, I was going to another school. I was about to study with the decent kids of decent people, but yeah, in some ways the boarding school was more rigid. But some average and well-off kids are not the kind of people you want to get in conflict with. Well, I think you know how angry some classmates can be. It happened that we, orphans, went to a regular city school like other kids, and the classes weren't divided for the normal kids and orphans. But believe me, normal kid leaders behave even worse than we did. At least at the boarding school, the leaders punished us for the craziest outrages only. Well, if you got caught anyway. And as you can see, I never got caught. So I had a week to figure out how to protect myself from my sisters. There were no thoughts. At least, not bloodthirsty ones. My reputation as a good girl didn't allow me to break someone's legs. After all, even the prank with William, no one thought it was me. Even William himself at one point believed it was he who broke into Dad's workshop. This is what I call aerobatics. I decided to offer my sisters a game called Let's Pretend We're Spies. It was very funny and helpful for me, though I doubted the girls knew what it was like to pretend. But it was worth a try. Well, anyway, I could always come up with something to change the rules. We secretly gathered in their room. Me, Chloe, and Danny, a secret girls' elite club, and I told them the new school would be very difficult for me. Many kids wouldn't want to be friends with an orphan girl. They would always mock me, and I said I needed the girls' help not to make this happen. Their mission would be keeping a secret eye on all my classmates. If someone said or wanted to do anything against me, they should report to me. Of course, in a secret way, so that no one would even think we were communicating. They would be my spies in the enemy's camp. I immediately warned them I might be a little rude sometimes, but that's for their benefit only, of course. Maybe I'd organize some kind of dirty trick or stuff, so that they wouldn't be suspected of cooperating with me. The girls happily hung their ears and showed me their Chinese dummies look. They liked this game very much. The secret's only for the 3 of us. Yeah. Anyway, the twins agreed, and didn't even ask what kind of benefit they would get from this. Stupid. The only thing that bothered me was that these 2 dummies didn't really know how to pretend. I decided to test it. I asked them not to tell Mom Jessica who took the cookies from the kitchen. The secret lasted just for a couple of hours, because they were winking at each other so significantly that even William realized the girls were hiding something. And it had something to do with me, because they looked at each other and they smiled mysteriously at me too. And then they told the secret to Jessica right away. Of course, she laughed, but I made conclusions, and they extremely disappointed me. I definitely wouldn't trust these two. Never. This was going to be my problem in the future, but it seemed to me that a couple of pranks towards them would divert any suspicion from me. At least, I could always demand to be transferred back to my old school. Otherwise, I would spend the rest of my school days as a loser. Later on, the preparation for school started. Mom and Dad bought all the school supplies. Backpacks, notebooks, textbooks, and so on. Everything A-plus students need. It was the first day of studies. We got on the school bus, and that's how I braced myself for a nightmare. Thanks, everybody. My name's Emma, and if you missed the previous episodes, I recommend starting with them. And I finally got to the new school and new adventures. Or rather, disappointments. Watch this episode to the end to find out what happened. On the bus, the twins showed wonders of disguise. They sat down far away from me and tried not to stick out like a sore thumb. Well, I wish they just hadn't giggled like crazy and not pointed fingers at me. But these are dreams, sweet and inapproachable. Then, I was introduced to the class, and that was boring. Well, it's all like, tell me about yourself. You'll definitely fit in. And wave like a monkey in a circus. The last one, of course, wasn't said by anybody. I just figured it out looking at the faces of my new classmates. Well, no one likes newcomers. This is a #1 rule of any school. The funny thing about it is that most children study together since junior preparatory school, although it's believed that at the time of high school, the classes are mixed, and a new person is always an event and a challenge at the same time. It's something like, it's interesting and scary, and you'd better stay where you are, dude. I was ready for that when I warned Chloe and Danny to stay away from me. I knew the rules. Don't be friends with the losers. Don't get yourself offended, and at first, it's better not to stand out. Otherwise, you'll be considered a freak, and your reputation will be destroyed. But, of course, my sisters spoiled my perfect game. Well, they just couldn't keep quiet. Apparently, losership was in their blood. Even when my teacher called me to introduce me to the class, they started bouncing in their places and waving hands at me joyfully. And then they started to show me with gestures that they saved the best desk next to them. It was a failure. A complete and total failure. Classmates immediately began to tease them, and they wouldn't be silent and remember that we were here to play spies and hide. But instead, they would start to prove eagerly how good and great I was. I read the word loser in the eyes of my classmates, in big, bright letters. At first, they looked at me attentively, but after my twins interfered, my importance fell to the bottom, and it was floundering there in the hope of getting out. It was urgent I do something. During the break, I finally realized that everything was bad. Although I demonstratively made a practice of sarcasm and invented new nicknames for my sisters, their stupidly mysterious faces gave them away, and my classmates, like sharks, were getting closer to me. A couple of guys even dared to say that I was an adoptee, and that I was communicating with the losers. The situation was running high, and I had to act urgently according to Plan B. This is the one where I humiliate my sisters in every way, and show that I have nothing to do with them. Well, I am an adoptee, and they're adoptees too. What's the connection between us? No connection. And you just can't choose your neighbors. In the hallway, when all the classmates went out for another break, I caught the girls near the school toilet and began to insult them. I acted straightforwardly, and even excessively boorish. Good girls don't usually say such things. I talked about how they annoyed me, how they drove me mad, and that our parents probably already thought about bringing them back to their shelter. To be honest, it was a moment of truth. I really thought so, and I finally got a chance to speak out, even in such a strange way. Anyway, nobody will believe me, or they won't believe witnesses, for I'm supposed to be a darling. Gradually, other guys from the class gathered around me and began to listen, and then they cheered me on when my words started to run out. The girls tried not to cry, but they didn't succeed. They just couldn't help it. Just in case, I winked at them, like reminding them of the game, so they wouldn't run to complain to the parents. And then I pushed both my sisters into this very toilet, into one booth, and supported the door with a mop from the other side. Evidently, my victorious appearance was terrifying, because my classmates immediately felt respect for me. At least the insults and whispers related to me stopped, but I felt delight almost physically. So I was going to the lesson like a queen with a large retinue of small hooligans. The girls remained sad in the toilet. I dropped them a secret text, that everything was under my control and according to the plan, and that I would definitely release them at the next break, provided that the mop would still be there. Frankly speaking, I didn't want to let them out, They annoyed me so much. But this SMS was a guarantee that I wouldn't get punished by the Smith Sr. at home. My sisters believed me, and I thought once again that the main thing in life was a first impression. These naive daisies considered me their sister and girlfriend, so they still tolerated me. However, I had a goal to get rid of them at my new home, and that didn't help me in any way. In the meantime, I didn't lose time in my classes. I really liked to learn, especially everything new and those subjects that weren't in the school curriculum. Psychology, math, planning. I was really good at it, but I never neglected other subjects either. By the end of the first school day, both children and teachers acknowledged me. They even praised me for my knowledge and told me that I should continue studying. Well, it's like they always say, you can do even better. I was afraid that after the twins' interference, the class would consider me a loser and a nerd. But my performance with the toilet immediately showed everyone that although studying was important too, I could also avenge myself easily. And there were no subtle manipulations. By the way, the girls were released by the cleaning lady, but they went home anyway, not to class, because all the classmates began to come up with offensive nicknames related to the toilet. I was on top of that. But, of course, I then calmed my sisters at home and pretended that I sympathized and felt bad for them. That's how my boring school days went. I was only glad that I slowly gained authority among high school students and even put a little competitive pressure on the company of the most popular superstars of the school. Now everyone was talking about me, not about their fashionable suits and stylish makeup. It pissed them off, but they still remember the story about the toilet. And at some point, it happened that a charming new cool girl, that is, I was given a choice that I hadn't even thought about before. As I supposed, there was also a division into smart guys and athletes in the school. This is normal, though usually nerds don't gather in groups. Well, in my previous school they didn't. And the nerds really were a force in school life here. They had their own social, some privileges in the library and at exams, various cool projects, and additional seminars on any topics that they were interested in. Their leader, Harry, even somehow managed to negotiate with the university professors who gave us lectures. Of course, this wasn't a part of the school curriculum. The athletes were also cool, like any other athletes. There were many of them who received scholarships, and the guys, in general, all the handsome guys of the school played soccer. And at some point, in fact, almost simultaneously, both of these groups decided that I was worthy to become part of them. Well, you might think that I became a puddle of joy and honor done to me, but frankly, I was rather stunned. All my previous experience shouted that I was choosing not just a future faction, but also a guy. For not ordinary members of the club approached me, but the leaders themselves. They just came straight down from heaven. I didn't have any questions for the smart guys. Harry just sat next to me in the library, and we had a nice talk. But it was more difficult with the athletes. Yes, I was tested for the running team, and you thought I was a cheerleader, right? And even showed my previous awards to the coach. Yes, I was accepted and introduced to the rest of the team, but still, even at a stretch, it couldn't be considered a reason for Jackson, the captain of the soccer team and just a handsome guy. But he was the one I met at the stadium, and he was the one who suggested I join the sports social. I felt like a hero of a computer game. Well, it's kinda, which faction will you join? If I only could see the whole list of goodies and achievements. But, alas, I had to think for myself. I really didn't want to stay at the bottom of school life. Besides, both these proposals had their advantages, and I wanted all. In despair, I even thought of consulting with Danny and Chloe. But, as always, they just blinked and started going into raptures about the fact that their sister was so popular and wonderful. Of course, their enthusiasm didn't help me, except for my ego. And I shouldn't have counted on them. The twins weren't even among the losers. My father advised me to think with my heart. I decided that I would use this method if I would suddenly want to jump in the pool with crocodiles. But my mother, she said that I would do sports anyway, and I would get into the social one way or another. But the smart guys were really cool. They don't invite any random person, so it's worth taking a chance. But even before I gave my answer, something happened that threw me off my stride. Somehow, in a mysterious way, Harry and Jackson found out that they both claimed to have my attention, and they fought right in the school hallway. I thought the smart guy would lose right away, especially with his glasses, but they both held on roughly equal ground until the headmaster came and dispersed them. But my suspicions were confirmed by this fight. Club is club, but it was clear to everyone, even to my sisters, that the two most popular guys in the school were fighting for me. just like guys and not like leaders of the club. It would be quite stupid. It means that no matter what I decide, I will automatically have a boyfriend, together with my status at school. And it radically changed all my theories and reasoning, because I really did not know who to choose. Hi everybody, my name's Emma, and I recommend you watch the previous episodes before starting this one. When you're done, come back and watch this one to the end. Today, I have to make a very difficult girlish decision, which boyfriend to choose. Smart or handsome? Handsome or smart? Suddenly, I found myself overwhelmed with all these love affairs. I was so confused. Somehow, honestly, I was never interested in any relationships while I was at the boarding school. No, I've seen some older guys get together, dating, and I even knew the truth about the birds and bees. But I've always had some more important things to do, instead of wasting my time on these stupid feelings. And just out of the blue, I started liking two guys, and I knew they liked me back. And they were both good. Jackson was a fancy hunk everybody admired. He was a cool school leader, and he came from a rich family. He drove a fancy car his parents gave him as soon as he got his driver's license, and he always spent a lot of money. And yeah, I forgot, he was very handsome. I mean, 100% handsome. I would even hang a poster with his face on my wall and admire him all the time. The only thing was, he didn't have enough brains. In contrast, Harry was smart. He could talk on a lot of topics. He knew a lot of different things, and he knew how to use it all to his advantage. Of course, his appearance was far from perfect. He wore some shabby sweaters all the time, which had stains on them. And the most terrible thing was these big, stupid glasses on his nose. But I think this was really the case when it didn't matter what a person looked like, because I really wanted to know his soul. And well, his shape was quite good, judging by how he confronted Jackson in a fight. Anyway, I had a big dilemma. I didn't know what to do. It would be fine if I had some real feeling towards any of them, but falling in love wasn't my thing at all. I even tried to flip a coin. I've flipped it a couple of times, by the way, but even the coin played tricks on me. The first time it fell on Harry, the second on Jackson, and so on. It all ended up the wind blew my coin away into the sewage drain. If it was about someone else and not me, I would choose Harry. The mind is something that is really cool, especially when a person knows how to use it for their own benefit. As Dad would say, it's the heart's choice. When you choose intuitively, you get to the point. But I liked money more, as well as prospects for the future, and my hormones, which suddenly woke up and squeaked joyfully in my head, like in the head of some young fangirl, said that I should choose Jackson and hurry before he changed his mind. However, the remnants of my brain insisted that Jackson had chosen me among other girls and could change me for someone more interesting or beautiful. But in general, I was more about to choose Jackson. I've had no experience yet, but am I not a manipulative genius? I don't think it's harder to convince anyone of his unearthly love for me than to get rid of annoying guardians or bores in the boarding school. In order not to make a mistake for sure, nobody would give me the right to make a mistake and to correct it, I decided to conduct an experiment. So to say, to look at two males in their natural habitat. I also wanted to test my skills in romance, for I began to doubt that I was almighty. I chose Saturday for the test, when we had no classes, and I actually made the guys ask me out with a couple of hints, both at once. Yeah, on the same day, but at different times. Jackson had to show himself during the day, and Harry had to arrange a romantic evening. The guys didn't let me down and were tricked by me. I got my invitations exactly when I was planning to, even with the right time. And Jackson was the first part of my entertaining program, and I expected something grandiose from him. At the appointed time, I was waiting for Jackson at the house gate. I looked rather pretty thanks to my mother's help, and he arrived in his fancy car, with a bouquet of flowers, and with such a smile that even my knees jittered. My sisters almost jumped out of the window with joy, and even my mother smiled friendly and sweet. By the way, the bouquet wasn't for me. It was for my mother. A kind of extra coin in a piggy bank of good attitude from relatives. And then we went for a ride through the city. During the ride, I was just looking and listening, and I rather didn't like what I heard. Yes, Jackson was cool and everyone knew it, but why repeat it every 5 minutes? Then he took me to the mall and offered to go shopping. Like he was going to pay and all that stuff, and girls love new things. Well, I went shopping. Why shouldn't I? He offered that himself, and I really liked all kinds of beautiful things, so why should I refuse? We finished our date in a cafe in that very mall, covered with bags to the top of my head. I sat there again and listened to him, and sometimes nodded when it was appropriate. Well, my boyfriend didn't need me to say anything. He was satisfied with everything, especially since this way he could tell me about his own poshness without being interrupted. And then Jackson took me and my bags home and tried to grope me. He said I should let him in gratitude for the time he spent. Dream on. Yeah, I'll get right on that. Of course, I immediately pretended to be an innocent girl and only let him kiss me on the cheek. He should keep distance and stay out of the way where he was not called. Moreover, he dropped the ball with his motives. While I was preparing for the second date, I shared the impression from the first one with my mother. Mother Jessica said that I was good and would go far, but it wasn't worth seeing that alpha loser anymore because he was a bit shadowy and too selfish. I didn't expect anything from Harry. I just wanted to have a good time with a nice person, no matter where. All the more so, thanks to Jackson's bragging, I wasn't hungry and had beautiful clothes. But a smart guy is a smart guy. He came without a car on foot and by bus, but he also brought flowers. And not only for my mother, but also for the twins, and for me too. It was cute. The girls immediately changed their mind about falling in love with a handsome posh, and gave their attention to Harry. And then we went somewhere. We took a direction to the park, but we didn't stop there and went further. Somewhere where decent paths and lanterns were replaced by a real forest. To be honest, I didn't even notice it, for I was fascinated by the conversation about novelties in medicine. Harry was an excellent storyteller and knew the stuff perfectly. In fact, he retold the last lecture from his club, but with his own examples and considerations. Though I was far from medicine, I listened to him with delight. And when I realized that we hadn't moved for 5 minutes, and when I looked around, I almost fell down on the spot. It was the most beautiful thing I'd ever seen in my life. We were standing on a rock, and stars were shining in front of us, as far as the eye could see. Thousands of stars. There was a waterfall below, almost imperceptible in the dark. The trees were swaying in the wind, and I thought I was standing right in the middle of space. And when Harry pulled out a small telescope and plaids from behind with a mysterious smile, I realized that I had fallen in love, because there is nothing in the world more interesting than stars. Well, except for psychology. That was a fantastic completion of not the best day. We were chatting, laying on plaids, looking at the sky and laughing, and everything was perfect. Just the best date of my life. An exemplary one. I really mean it. Maybe there was something wrong with me, for I was impressed by the sky and not by the stores. And when we were going home, something happened, and then I realized completely that I had made the right choice. They were waiting for us near my house. I don't know who revealed to Jackson that today I had a date with Harry too, but that narcissistic jerk appeared almost on the doorstep of my house, and he wasn't alone, but with his friends. And, of course, they immediately attacked Harry. I mean those friends, not Jackson. Jackson's brain was only enough to call me names from his spot, and periodically shout at me that I was stupid to go out with this nerd. I didn't listen to him. I screamed, attracting the attention of my neighbors, and called the police myself. But Harry also did a great job without me. He decked 3 jerks to the asphalt almost without strain. That's how the police caught us. 3 were lying, and the guys were standing in front of me drilling each other with their eyes. When the cops asked what was going on here, I acted terribly illogical. I didn't even expect that from myself. I approached Harry, took his hand, and told a tragic story to the cops with a crying face. We were a pair of sweethearts, and we were on our way home returning from the best date, so that we could certainly arrive in time before curfew. Harry accompanied me like a knight, and then these jerks appeared. They attacked us, threatened us, and behaved disgustingly. As a result, the cops took the hooligans to the police station, and I took Harry to my room, for he needed someone to treat the grazes on his fists. And when the medical assistance was provided, the words were said, and it was time for the guy to leave. I kissed him myself. I really kissed him right on the lips. The terrible day ended absolutely amazing, though illogically. But feelings seem to be something that don't care about logic. They just exist, and it's only up to you to decide what to do with them, whether indulge in or ignore them. Still, I did what Mr. Smith advised me to do. I listened to my heart, but in the morning, I had to face the same mess at school. Offended by my refusal, and having spent the night at the police station, Jackson put on an ugly show right in the school corridor. He shouted that I would regret what I had done, and that I should understand where my place was, that I should start to learn to kiss his shoes already. I just laughed at him. His childish threats didn't touch me in any way, for I had seen more terrible people in my life before. Besides, Jackson could actually do nothing to me, except maybe for his blue fantasies. He could only shake the air and spoil my mood with his stupidity. Harry and I are now sitting together and holding hands defiantly. They took me to the club of smart guys, and all the smart guys were happy about it. I have no idea why. Certainly, many didn't like Jackson, but they began to adore me, not because of the fact that I put him in his place, right? However, soon Jackson and his screams from the spot became the least of our problems. It was all because Harry began to have some strange troubles with his studies. And that was Harry, the really smartest one of us. For some reason, his tests didn't gain the necessary points, although he still received excellent for his answers. And I had to deal with that riddle as soon as possible. Hi everyone, my name's Emma, and be sure to check out the previous episodes if you missed them. And I have ahead of me what I usually don't do: restoration of justice and punishment of offenders. Want to see it? Watch this episode to the end. That'll be interesting. Of course, the threats from Jackson were no more than words, but I was still worried. I didn't want to get in trouble because of this popinjay. However, I didn't have much time, for an incomprehensible story with Harry and his grades turned our whole club upside down. We even wrote letters to the city mayor's office and the headmaster to allow Harry to make up the tests and improve all the terrible grades. Meanwhile, Jackson was constantly somewhere near me and regularly tried to piss me off with his insults. What's worst of all, the girls, Chloe and Danny, succumbed to these cheap tricks and threw themselves at my defense. The whole class laughed about it, and the twins got into trouble. One day, someone would ruin their things in their lockers. Another day, the shoelaces of their shoes appeared to be tied together. And still another day, someone would smear their bench in the dining room with something sticky. So I was torn between attempts to calm the twins, yet I had no plans to make them victims. It would have damaged my plans, and attempts to figure out what the hell was going on with my boyfriend's grades. Nobody, not even teachers, believed that Harry was suddenly that stupid. And it meant that, but I had no idea what it meant. How did perfect tests from Harry's perfect head turn into junk in the teacher's desk? Magic? I suspected that someone was purposely falsifying the tests. But without proof, I had nothing. I even learned to enjoy fighting with Jackson being in a stress mode. I loved to trash talk him in front of everyone. It was even kind of comforting, especially when he reached a point and started going nuts on everything that moved, spraying everyone with his spit. All of a sudden, the answer to the question, what is going on, was given by the twins. I almost forgot about them because of all these troubles. I just kept track of them, so that they were not finally taken down, but I didn't really expect that from them. Chloe and Danny caught me at home and pushed me to the wall. Out of habit, I wanted to get away from them, but those mysterious faces. You remember that these two couldn't keep secrets. So, some secret definitely appeared in their heads, and they just couldn't keep it. I decided to stay and listen to them. My sisters told me they knew that I wanted to help Harry with his grades, and they also knew who exactly prevented Harry from learning well and how he did it. Well, the natural lucklessness of the twins this time helped me a lot. Ironically, it was our common enemy who made the girls witnesses of his crimes. They stayed in the class to collect their things under the desk. As it used to be, someone, think Jackson, cut the handles of their bags just for fun. The bags broke when the girls got up from their desks, and all small things rolled up under the desks. In fact, that's why they weren't noticed by our mysterious enemy. But the girls watched Jackson sneaking into the teacher's desk and changing the tests blatantly. Or rather, not the tests themselves, but only the cover pages printed from the computer, with the names of those who did these tests. That's the answer to these questions. How and why? To be honest, I wouldn't even think that this selfish guy would do dirt on us with his own hands. Well, he doesn't seem to be brave and determined. Rather, as we've already seen, the one who preferred to use someone as a cat's paw. So, it was a real surprise. It was his sweet revenge. Well, I thought he'd take revenge on me, for I dared not to choose him. But this Twilight genius decided to frame Harry. So it happened that Harry was taking his tests as usual, but Jackson was changing the names on them and claiming Harry's work as his own. As a result, he received excellent himself, and Harry got his D, which was given out of pity. I should laugh, or just tell Harry and let him fix everything himself. It would be right and logical. I always do like this. But this time, I felt differently. It should seem that I don't care. It's not me who was set up in such a simple and stupid way. However, something inside me shouted in a very strong language that I just had to put the idiot in his place. And contrary to logic, I obeyed these shouts. At a glance, I thought that Harry was clearly ruining me. I would never jump into a risky project offending someone before, and now I almost ran to save him, even without a correct and beautiful legend, like a loving fool. I had to watch our mysterious but stupid villain for a while, and then, when Jackson changed the tests next time, and not just some test, but the final ones for the semester, it was I who sneaked into the teacher's desk and restored justice. And then, just out of the kindness of my heart, I replaced Jackson's disgusting work with an even more disgusting one. Of course, it couldn't be any worse, but that allegedly, accidentally forgotten, crib sheet between the sheets of test. A big boom was waiting for Jackson, taking into account the fact that the crib sheet is an immediate expulsion with the most disgusting reputation. We all had a chance to have some fun when the tests would be checked. And it happened so. The representatives of the school office shouted so loudly that the walls were shaking. Such a shame. He was a step away from being a graduate, and not only does he crib, he also somehow forgets his crib sheet in his test. Jackson was called to different offices, and there were investigations and scandals. His parents waved their wallets as a victory banner, but still, he managed to avoid expulsion. The test, though with a crib sheet, was written in the most disgusting way. So, the boy didn't crib it. If he cheated, maybe someone clever thought it would appear in his work. And Harry got his highest grade, and finally ceased to look like a ghost. I was happy for him. We even celebrated this event in a small circle of our club. He didn't know what exactly happened, but anyway he guessed that I was involved in it somehow, because at first he smiled at me for a long time, and then he said, "Thank you," but in a way that no one could hear. And then I got the picture. I sat at home on the bed, with a stupid smile on my face and kissed lips, and I felt like I was hit on the head with something heavy. Damn, I had no idea why I got involved in this story. Really? Breaking into a teacher's desk to save a loved one? Isn't that nonsense? Since when do I care about other people? I even fell out of reality for a while from that shock that I felt for myself, and it was my fatal mistake. I missed the real danger when I returned to myself, because all of this stuff about revenge and restoration of justice, I just forgot that I was a victim myself. I suffered from teachers' arbitrary will at a French lesson. For my own test was crossed out by a red pen with a note that I didn't sufficiently cover the topic. Me? Not sufficiently? The teacher was definitely picking on me. She didn't even try to hide the fact that she didn't like me, except that before the insults from her didn't go beyond words, and it didn't matter much. A teacher scolded me at the lesson. Well, maybe she would feel better after that. So what? But I couldn't let her underestimate the grades, which were deserved, and exceptionally positive. I was sure about that. I had to take revenge on the teacher, and the easiest thing to do was to do it in class, in front of everyone, so that no one would suspect me in the crowd. The only thing was, as always, the skill of breaking in helped me. I decided that if the teacher played dirty, I would be hatefulness personified, and on a salary day. It was necessary to do my best, so that nobody would notice me. I sneaked into the math class and pulled out an envelope with money from the teacher's bag. And then, even more secretly, just like a shadow, I climbed into the French class and threw the money to my unloved teacher. The funny thing was that the money would definitely have been found. At least the teacher would have given herself up in case of running to the school office with extra money, but even this wasn't necessary. On leaving school, when the math teacher had already managed to raise a panic about the loss of salary, the French teacher's bag squeaked. There are gates in front of our school entrance, like those in stores. As the school office claims, they're installed for prevention of terrorist attacks. But in fact, they often squeak like this, and each time the guards check everything to find a keychain, lighter, or metal rivets on someone's pants. But once it rings, you should check it. And the teacher's bag was shaken out for suspicious things. And, of course, they found the extra envelope with the math teacher's salary. There was a global scandal. Everybody was arguing with everybody. The French teacher was shouting that it wasn't her fault. The math teacher was wailing that he didn't understand what was going on in this school. As a result, the French teacher was fired without much ado, and she was replaced by another teacher. It felt good. The substitute teacher turned out to be a blasé person, and gave excellent to everyone who could put at least 2 words together. My report card improved, Harry became the best pupil again, and life was getting better. Exactly until that bastard, Jackson, appeared in front of my house and offered to take a walk. When I asked him the logical question of why the hell I should walk with him, he just waved his phone and said he had an interesting video. The video, shot from around the corner, in a very lousy quality, clearly showed me throwing an envelope and a small piece of foil into the French teacher's bag. The air clearly smelled of failure, expulsion, and a return to the boarding school. Jackson said that I had to obey him in everything. Well, to keep this video under wraps, I agreed to play his game. Hi everyone, my name's Emma, and I recommend you watch the previous episodes if you missed them. And I have plans to take revenge on the one who's blackmailing me. Do you want to know whether I brought my plan into effect or not? Watch this episode to the end. Jackson was a typical villain, and just as typically predictable in his anger. I really mean it. I was even bored to watch all that. He appeared to be not an anti-hero, but rather some kind of an idiot. The first thing he ordered me to do was to follow him and look into his eyes, as well as help him on trifles, like bringing him a tray in the dining room, packing up his things or sitting on the grandstand, and squeaking enthusiastically when he was training with his team. Apparently, this is how he was going to assert himself. Well, you see that he was a petty villain. But, of course, these stupid orders damaged my pride. I'm a genius. He could find a more practical use for me. At least I could do his homework for him. But he seemed to think of me as a silly hen. But I kept silent and did everything as he said. Why make such an unstable person angry? Others were surprised. Some even tried to say something. But Jackson didn't give me an order not to respond to offenses. So all the disgruntled very quickly learned why they should never even think badly of me. In fact, I didn't do anything global to them. A couple of words here, an accident there, and even the dumbest ones connected their own problems with the fact that they had insulted me, the darling. And I told my sisters that this was all a big and insidious plan named after me. I also added some mysteries, as if I was doing all this to avenge them, because Jackson had offended them more than once. It was not so untrue, though. Actually, I had a plan, and it was quite working. I just needed time for the villain to relax and believe that I was in his hands. And then, my golden hands and my talent for breaking locks would come into play. But while I was following the footsteps of Jackson, pretending to be satisfied with the role of his pet dog, something else happened. When Harry tried to interfere several times, Jackson ordered me to quarrel with him in a loud and defiant manner. And if I refused, he would send everyone that video with my participation. So I had to quarrel with Harry. I tried, however, to come up with such an excuse to make Harry understand that I didn't actually want to hurt him. But still, it was an ugly and loud quarrel. For we began to argue in the library, and we finished in the schoolyard, before a bunch of witnesses. I shouted that I could choose with whom to be friends or communicate, that Jackson was much prettier and better than Harry. At least he had the money to buy his girlfriend whatever she wanted. Well, I also pulled a love card on him, claiming how much I was in love with this jerk. All I had to do was hope that Harry was a really smart guy, and that he would understand that I would never actually say anything like that. But I wasn't sure that he would understand. After this quarrel, I was finally tired of pretending to be a dutiful dog at Jackson's feet. So I chose the right time and just climbed into his locker and hacked his iPhone, with the help of wax, scotch, and my own stubbornness. Fortunately, he still used the unlocking with his finger. Otherwise, I would have had to act more aggressively. And then I removed the video from his phone and from the cloud, and I also formatted everything that was stored there. However, I had previously dropped the dirt on my phone. Why? In fact, montage is a great thing, especially if you have skills and know how to fix everything correctly. I had it all. For I was a genius after all. So in my spare time from Jackson, who kept thinking I was his obedient doll, I made the dirt on Jackson himself out of my own dirt. All I had to do was lay a couple of frames and change me for him. It took literally a couple of hours, and the great stuff was ready, and no cop could figure it out thanks to the bad quality of the video. And it served him right, for he shouldn't have blackmailed weak little me. Naturally, I wasn't going to blackmail Jackson back. I just didn't need it. Why? It was enough to leak the video on the school network, so everyone could enjoy the way this hero throws an envelope with another man's money into the French teacher's bag. Didn't I tell you that revenge should be served to the offender's face? Well, so he caught it with his face. And the most interesting thing was that Jackson had no chance to slime away. The French teacher had already been kicked out of school, which meant that's what shown in the video was absolutely true. Think of my previous experience with the tests as a trial setup, a kind of last chance. And now I played it in a serious manner. I played safe. As soon as the video reached the ears, or rather the eyes, of representatives of the school office, an investigation immediately took place. And not such as it was the last time, but a real one, even with the involvement of the police. And that was right. That was a real theft, and with a malicious intent towards the teacher. Jackson was kicked out. He tried to shout something else about the fact that the main evil was me. But who would listen to the criminal? Especially the one who blames everything on sweet, naive me, with my big eyes and impeccable reputation. Of course, some people knew the truth. Harry knew it. I just had to make peace with him. And my sisters did. But they were silent, for they themselves were glad that there was a talent that managed to clamp down on the main hooligan and bully in the school. And they also had no proof. Meanwhile, on a wave of success, I decided to act. I had enough of sitting and dreaming about feelings. Still, Jackson unwittingly helped me get rid of stupid affections with his orders. I mean the quarrel with Harry, because they only prevented me from getting to my goal. Now, without unnecessary love, without having to think about someone other than myself, I could finally start my big game of driving out superfluous relatives of my house. This is what I did as soon as I got home. It was easy to finally set William up. He already had been in bad with his parents, and all I had to do was bring their disappointment to a maximum. After all, for Mother Jessica, the reputation of the family was so important. I started the preparation in advance. I took my mother's pressure pills and sprinkled some into a bottle of water, which my brother always carried with him. When William once again went somewhere on his boyish business with a stuffed bottle, I climbed into his room and looked around. I needed something. Fortunately, my younger brother offered me a weapon against him. His passion for collecting cars was something I never understood. Why spend money on such expensive nonsense? But my parents believed that the boy should be interested in something, and willingly sponsored all purchases. This collection had to disappear. I gathered all the cars, as well as some of the things that could theoretically be sold at a higher price, such as game consoles, skateboards, and other stuff, and then I brought it to a pawn shop. As an honest girl, I returned the money from the sale to William. I put it in the closet, away from his eyes. Meanwhile, my brother came home, and judging by the way he clung to the walls and wobbled, the water was good for him. Or rather, it was good for me, because when my parents were looking at how William was trying to climb the stairs, of course, they wouldn't think that there were some pills in his water. More likely, judging by my mother's face, they decided that there was not water in the bottle. And they even tried to check it, but my brother showed them an empty bottle laughing. And then everything went exactly as I had planned. While my father tried to bring William to his senses and interrogate him, my mother was checking his room. And of course, she could find neither the expensive collection nor some other things. Everything was obvious to the adults. Apparently because of poor genetics or lack of education, my brother has taken the low road and got carried away by something that is not talked about in a decent family. Alcohol, or maybe even worse substances. He even started selling things, since he was deprived of his pocket money. Actually, I was a little frightened by how quickly they believed in my show. Well, this particular child lived in their house for several years, and was never caught doing something inappropriate, not a single time. Well, he wasn't even naughty like all boys. He was just curious sometimes, and it was always harmless, and our parents called him a criminal. Of course, it was in my interests, so I pretended that everything was okay, and I added some pepper to my parents' panic fire, remembering that I saw my brother in bad company. Immediately, the story of the devastated workshop came to light. However, now it was presented not as a prank, but like a kind of what-to-sell quest. And, as a result, William, who had learned from his previous experience, didn't even try to defend himself. Or maybe he couldn't, for the pills were still working. He was locked in his room without the right to go out until they decided what to do with him. I was glad. Finally, everything began to go as it should. William was no longer my rival. I overheard my parents talking to each other about taking him back to the boarding school. There were sisters in line, and my plan already contained everything I had to do to get rid of them. And first of all, according to my own tradition, I had to arrange a meeting with the twins in my room. Of course, a top-secret one. A meeting that no one could tell anybody about. And then the usual logic got into the game. And my sisters were not logical-minded at all. Hi, everyone. Be sure to watch the previous episodes if you haven't seen them yet. And now Emma is with you. And I have my dear sisters Chloe and Danny next in line. I was walking on thin, very thin ice. The sisters, unlike William, were able to think, even if they didn't strain themselves too much for this. Besides, there were two of them, and they walked together all the time, which made it very difficult for me. It would have been much easier to catch them singly. This time I wanted to play the card of their sense of justice and eternal desire to save the neighbor, and it's desirable not to lay myself open. I became paranoid about not getting into trouble anymore because of my own inattention. Though I really had a reason to be paranoid with my sisters. And to begin with, at our top-secret meeting of the top-secret sisters' office, I put on the agenda information that my success was not as remarkable as I would like it to be, because I had certainly been busy lately taking revenge on Jackson for my favorite sisters. I wish there was a way to improve my grades. For example, someone could climb into the headmaster's office and take a couple of clean reports not yet filled out by teachers, and then replace the real ones with them. But, of course, this is all theory. Of course, none of us would do such a thing. No, no. There could be no talk about it. The girls moved. Well, it wasn't in vain that I learned for so many years to speak correctly with hopeless idiots. Now they were firmly convinced that my studies suffered because of them, and knowing their aspirations. Well, yes, I've already talked about it, but that wasn't my goal at all. The fact that they consider themselves my debtors was nice, but I needed much more. I gave them not only the goal, but also the means to achieve it. I was good at it. Well, at first, the girls just nodded to my words and sighed. But at school, where up to now there had been gossip about Jackson's expulsion and his previous manipulations with Harry's works, their thoughts began to acquire a very specific direction, and I walked past them and sighed sadly, cuddling my notebooks. The most interesting thing was that my grades were great, as well as all my tests. Teachers praised me regularly as two other best students of the cohort, but the twins didn't even notice it, completely trusting my words and my sad face. Well, what can you do? Not everyone in our world is given brains. Drama happened when they broke into my room as usual, and I cried there over my English literature notebook. Chloe and Danny immediately forgot why they came and began to comfort me in unison, and then they exchanged looks as mysteriously as possible, so that it cost me all my acting abilities not to give out a hoarse laugh on the spot. Of course, I was there when they turned to crime. It was important for me to know that my trap would slam exactly as I needed, so I just followed the twins. Oh, it wasn't difficult. They didn't even try to hide. They literally went through all the obstacles. The funny thing was that they could have succeeded. No one would have the idea that the two quietest and most obedient girls could be up to something. If so, they could have a lot of reasons to go to the headmaster's office, right? But this was what they had for me, so that no one would miss the theft for sure. I made a noise in the corridor, just dropping my books under the feet of junior high school students, who were just passing by. Everyone fell down, and the headmaster arrived at once. But when he saw that nothing was going on, he immediately disappeared in his office. And he saw something that was worthy of a painting by an artist's pen. My not-too-smart sister stood above his desk and wrote something on the report cards fitfully during school hours, right in his office, where he could return at any moment. The headmaster didn't start shouting at once just because he had really freaked out from shock. You know, this is a kind of situation where you either have to be immortal to get into a locked office without the headmaster, or completely crazy. And both options somehow didn't fit for Danny and Chloe, nice and calm girls from the back desk. But then, of course, everybody came to their senses, and there was an investigation. My parents were called to the school, and I was invited as a new relative, and other people, even from the city hall, I suppose. The question on the agenda was, what was it anyway? Well, as for me, I was pleasantly surprised by the fact that the twins showed neither with a word nor with a look that I was somehow involved in the story. On the contrary, sobbing and clinging to each other, they told me that they wanted to change their reports because their grades weren't high enough and their mother would scold them for it. There was no scandal. I suspect that even though adults pretended that everything was all right, in fact, they were still in kind of shock. The sisters weren't even expelled. They were just imposed a fine in the form of makeup work for the benefit of the school, and were just sent to all 4 winds. But at home, the Smiths were not as kind as the teachers. I think they were just tired of constant failures that hit their reputation, so they took it out on all their children. Well, except for me, of course. I wasn't guilty of anything. The girls were sent to their room and locked in. Meanwhile, my mother arranged a real interrogation for me. No, nobody accused me. My mother was interested in something else. She asked me whether I knew why they thought of going into the headmaster's office, and whether they asked me for help. Well, everything like that. I assured my mother that I had no idea about their plans. Despite living in the same house and having a kind of kinship, the girls and I never became friends. And they knew that I had other problems. For example, with Jackson and Terry. So, alas, I couldn't help my sisters. Neither could I do something bad for them. But I confirmed the fact that their grades were not very good. Well, I insisted that it wasn't Chloe and Danny's fault that they learnt badly. It was all because of guys who kept bullying them, even though Jackson was no longer at school. I also added that I had heard how they were interested in how Jackson had faked Harry's grades during their confrontation. I don't know if my mother believed me or not. However, she made some conclusions. But for some reason, she didn't share them with me. I was also sent to my room and asked to sit quietly. My parents had to consult and decide what to do next. Of course, I just had no right to keep my seat. As soon as Mom and Dad hid in Mom's office, my feet immediately carried me to do my favorite thing. That is, to eavesdrop. And to peek as well, if I managed to. You see, information rules the world. Yeah, our parents discussed their adopted children. Dad said that all this was expected when you take in a teenage orphan, and that they should give us all another chance. But Mom wanted to act radically. Reputation was really important to her. You know, business and all that stuff. And bad children didn't fit into that reputation in any way. They were arguing, making agreements, looking for compromises. And as a result, they decided to bring William and the twins back to the shelters. Not forever, just for a while, so that they remembered what it was like to be unwanted, if they had already forgotten that feeling. Well, it was a strange decision, as if they weren't raising children but dogs, but they decided to tell this wonderful news to the children tomorrow at lunch, apparently to keep them unaware and waiting for a longer time, or maybe to spoil everyone's appetite with morning faces. I had no idea why it was necessary to leave it until tomorrow, and namely till lunch. But it didn't matter. The main thing was that I won. I could do it again. Yes, even if it was only a temporary return, my experience of previous life in the boarding school said that a couple of weeks for education could mean a total rejection of custody. So, I could go and celebrate the fact that once again, all my plans were fulfilled in the most ideal way for me. Well, of course, I just couldn't help but share it with my sisters. I would have spoiled William's mood too, but I had no way to his room. The windows of his room faced the lawn, and were perfectly visible from all sides. And for some reason, my parents didn't leave me the key, but it was easier to climb up to the girls than to reach my own room. As ill luck would have it, there was a trellis for flowers attached to their windows, but no one guessed to light the backyard for some reason. So I climbed up to my sisters by night like a shadow and you should have seen their faces. It was beautiful, like a balm for my wounded soul. When I told them that I overheard our parents talking, they weren't too scared at first, but when the conversation turned to the shelter and their return there, I wonder why the house didn't collapse because of their hysterics. Even our parents were not in a hurry to find out what kind of howling is heard in their home. But just in case, at the first signs of a sound attack, I went out the same window, and I warned them that if one of our parents asked me anything, I would say that I had not seen anything, had not heard anything, and didn't know anything. And then I locked myself in my room and just rejoiced like an insane person. I only had to wait for tomorrow's lunch and see everything with my own eyes. And help my former relatives to bring their suitcases to the car, of course. And maybe cry a bit to keep my image. Hey everybody, if you haven't watched the previous episodes yet, start with them, or you won't understand anything. And I'm Emma, and today is a day of my triumph. The situation in the house sharply became, unhealthy. William was never let out of his room. The girls were crying, and it seemed that at such a pace, we would be washed away, together with the house like in some cartoon. I was going about the house thinking about what changes I should start in the Smiths family, when my sisters and brother would go back to the shelters, and I tried not to be caught by the parents' eyes. They had very dark faces. Dad didn't even pop in his studio once in the evening, and I had never seen anything like that in the 6 months that I lived in their house. At lunch, where all the guilty were brought to our parents, it got even worse. Silent, sad, and dark faces, sluggish knocking of forks against plates. But my mother kept the theatrical pause, and only when it became clear that no one would eat anything on that day, she got up and took the word. Using strict and harsh terms, she explained to all the children their position in our house. She reminded that the house, the good things and parental love were things that couldn't be achieved by disgusting faults. And in the end, she said that William, Daniela, and Chloe were leaving for boarding school tonight, and that was a final blow. Not forever, however, just for a couple of weeks, to remember what gratitude and good behavior was. Well, and then she ordered them to pack up their things, of course. However, she forbid them to take really valuable things with them, and that was logical. By the way, for even some decent clothes could be taken away from them the first 5 minutes, and it was only about the clothes. The girls sobbed again, and William did as well. I was even wondering where did they get so much water from, but being a good sister, Besides, my parents obviously expected this from me. I started comforting them all. We hid in the girls' room, all four of us. I stroked their shoulders for a long time and said that the parents would come to their senses and would definitely take them back, even William. And then I helped to pack up their things, trying not to give away how much I wanted to smile. It constantly seemed to me that now, one more second should pass, and they would get the picture. It couldn't be that neither William nor his sisters would have noticed who was behind all their problems. Especially as it didn't work perfectly for girls. They could have guessed about it. I was waiting for accusations, quarrels, and screams about how unjust and horrible everything was. At least some reaction to what was happening, except endless tears and big calf eyes. But it seemed that in our family, the desire to resist the circumstances, as well as the brains, were solely my features. It's weird to think that way about foster children, right? Well, I calmed everyone down, and worked as a nanny for everyone. Even for the sake of appearance, I talked to my mother, so that she could soften the punishment for the girls. I didn't ask for William out of principle, and only sometimes my desire to be happy became too unbearable. Then I ran to my room and laughed in my pillow there. But still, why didn't they resist? Why didn't they hate me, at least just for being punished, and for the fact that I was staying at home? It was completely incomprehensible to me. I even asked the girls on purpose if they were angry with me, and I received only a mute question in response. Like, why should they be angry? As a joke, I offered to take revenge on the Smiths for not knowing how to raise children at all. I offered to just run away from home before a taxi arrives, and then let the parents prove to social services that they wanted the best. Suddenly the girls supported my idiotic plan. No, I mean it. They were even glad that there was no need to pack things up, and then they specified whether I could pull them out through the window where I regularly climbed myself. I had to urgently take my words back and insist on the fact that I was just kidding. Like, tee-hee, my humor was so weird, you know? Otherwise, they would really get out of the house. With their lame logic, they could do it. And I still needed the Smiths myself, preferably happy, well off, and with a good reputation. And then my mother came into the room pretending not to see me at all. What was the punishment if the twins could have all kinds of visitors? And ordered the girls to get ready to go out. She said that they had another half hour, and it would be better for them not to be late, and that she was going to deduct the cost for a taxi from their account. She said in such an official and strict way that everything inside me turned upside down. And don't even ask about the girls. They rushed to our mother and begged not to give them away. They cried again, and it was that instead of trying to make an agreement or something like that. If I were them, I would definitely try to make an agreement. I would blame everyone around me. I would say that I was set up, and play a card of emotions. And my mother had them, although she was called the Iron Lady. Well, I don't know, but I would do something. Maybe I would even use blackmail. Why not? During the time I lived in that house, I had accumulated a great amount of dirt on my family. But these were my thoughts. And the twins always differed in that they went the hardest way. While Chloe and Danny were giving my mother a farewell concert on her nerves, I quietly went to my room before I could get into trouble. And being alone already, and having made sure that no one would come in, I indulged in joy and dreams. I imagined how the whole house would be at my disposal. Parents would certainly increase my allowance, buy me a lot of beautiful things, and we would definitely go to the sea on vacation. Yes, and no boring sisters would ruin my vacation. Then I danced a little to the music in my headphones. And then I got a strange feeling. Things had been packed. Suitcases were downstairs waiting for their time. Everything was fine. I had a couple of hours to wait until a taxi got there to take William, Danny, and Chloe away from me. So why was I not glad? I expected to enjoy every minute. Every sobbing of the twins and the cry of William. I had to shine with happiness. After all, I won. Once again, I did what I wanted, and now I only had to use my own success to the fullest. But I wasn't happy, for some reason. Something was gnawing at my heart, and it got worse and worse, and I wanted to cry. I had completely ceased to understand myself. I had no heart. Everybody told me that. So where did all these wrong, superfluous emotions come from? To say goodbye, I went to the girls' room to, I don't know, maybe make sure that they were doing well? Well, as far as it was possible in their situation. I was still waiting for them to start blaming me, or at least say something to make me feel in my element again, like contempt, resentment, and all that. But there was nothing of the kind. The girls just hugged me from both sides, and remained so for a long time. And because of this simple and such a warm gesture, I had been almost eaten by remorse, and I understood for the first time in my life what mental pain was like. I gave them gifts, which I had prepared especially for that day. Actually, it was an extra reason to make fun of them. I mean the album with our joint photos. Somewhere there were 3 of us. William flashed in some places, and there was a large family photo in the center. Parents were in the center, Mom was smiling, and Dad was holding her hand. And we all were on the sides, looking into the cameras and trying not to mug faces. And in the background, an old apple tree was quietly dropping flowers. I wanted to hurt them. I wanted to remind them what they lost. But suddenly, even for me, the meaning of the gift changed. As if my subconscious broke out once again and shouted that it would miss them, and they had seemed to have understood everything correctly. And I saw my personal hell with my own eyes. I couldn't let them go, I just couldn't. Without logic, without reason, without everything that seemed important to me before. It was me who had to leave, not them. Me, as the most important evil in our home. I hid behind my armor of insensitivity before only because nobody ever loved me. I just didn't know what it was. How could I know what it was? Shelter children don't even know words like that. And only now, after all these stories with sisters, with Harry, with parents, who were really good people, I realized it. All this time, I wasn't the smartest person. I was just looking for love. An ordinary lost child who was not told in time that everything would be fine. Sounds trite? Well, let it be. This is my life. If I want a little vanilla banality, so be it. And I decided that I had to fix everything, right now. I had to go and confess to my mother that it was all my fault, and the girls and William were just victims of evil and insidious me, and let it be what it would be. It was very scary, but I knew that what I wanted to do was right. It wasn't logical, and it didn't pursue any goals, but it was just right and humanly. And let my mother punish me for sure, perhaps send me back so that I wouldn't spoil good children with my behavior, but I was to blame for everything. I had to pay for it. That meant I had to turn the handle of my mother's office, lower my eyes, and... Hi, everyone. I advise you to start watching the previous episodes if you haven't seen them yet. And Emma is with you, and I think I'm going to give up, because my sisters were really important to me. I was scared. I was terribly scared. I had never done what I was going to do before, and it made my nerves stretched like ropes. But I had to confess everything to my mother. And whatever happens, Chloe and Danny and little William, they didn't deserve to be kicked out of the house. Mom sat in her office and worked as always. In my opinion, nothing could ever knock her out of her schedule. She worked even when she had a temperature of 40 degrees and trembling hands. But during a work schedule, all the lines came out clear from under her hand, as if there were no diseases. Iron Lady, that was all about her. I scrambled at the door quietly and came in, and then I froze on the threshold, afraid to raise my eyes and start talking. I knew what would happen next, but I still couldn't prepare for it. Mom raised her head from her papers and looked at me very attentively. It was as if, well, no. She couldn't have known that it was all arranged by me. Maybe she could have guessed, but she had no evidence of this either. My mother nodded, and I started the story. From the very beginning, or rather, from the moment I saw her and Father at the entrance to the shelter, and decided that they would be a great family for me. And then it turned out that other children already lived in their house. Happy, unable to survive and achieve their goals, and terribly naive. And how I came up with a way to get rid of them from the very beginning. I talked, and I just couldn't stop. I described all my ideas and how I fulfilled all the points of my plan. And then I realized that I really didn't want those who didn't even know about them to be responsible for my transgressions, and that they should punish me, and let them not be touched. My mother looked at me again with the very same look, and asked if I was sure of what I was saying. She meant whether I really wanted to be punished for them. I nodded, and then my mother said that she appreciated my honesty, but she still couldn't forgive me for what I've done in pursuit of my happiness. And since locking me in my room and depriving me of sweets was useless, it was easier to bring me back to boarding school instead of the other children. So to say, no person, no problem. Not for a while, as I planned to do to educate my brothers and sisters. But forever. Well, for the remaining 2 years until I aged out, without the right to go back. There you go. This is what I was afraid of. Although I really understood it after my revelations, my mother just couldn't do anything different. I really interfered with their lives, created problems, blackmailed them, framed them. And in fact, I had never been a perfect child, and the family didn't have enough time to get used to me in 6 months. I agreed, and I went to pack my things. In my room, my torture continued by the fact that every knick-knack reminded me of what I had lost. Joint photos, small gifts like the beaded friendship bracelet I used to laugh at, funny socks that roamed from closet to closet all these 6 months. I could be really happy here. I was accepted and loved at once, simply because these particular guys never grew teeth and didn't know any other way. There was also Harry, the guys from the Smart Club, an older funny neighbor with her poodles. Leaving was painful. It was even more painful to understand that I had ruined everything with my own hands. Instead of just living, I thought that I was the smartest. I was making some plans, and then I sent all good things to the bottom. Like, why does an independent and cunning person like me need these fools? And it turned out that I needed them very much. Tell me, why do we start to appreciate only what we've lost? The only thing I asked my mother was for some time. I wanted to say goodbye to everyone, so that I could see how it felt when it was good. My mother agreed, and moved the taxi to the next day. After my suitcases were packed, I went to the girls, and told them that our parents had changed their mind about bringing them back to the shelter. The twins were so happy. They didn't even ask why suddenly my mother, who never changed her plans, changed her mind. And there were so many hugs and so much laughter that it would suffice for a couple of weeks. Even when I couldn't stand this puppy adoration and confessed to them that I had set everything up by myself and that I just wanted to make it up to them. They didn't get angry or shout. They just hugged me again and said that I was still wonderful even if I thought I was evil, and that I just needed someone to wake up my heart. Probably it was true. My heart just woke up a bit late. Couldn't it kick me earlier? Then, maybe, I wouldn't have to tear them all out of there with such pain. I fell asleep in the girls' room, tiredness, and then this nervous swing. I just sank into a deep sleep on the extra bed that they put in for me in the very first week at the Smiths. And all night in my sleep I chased my sisters, in an attempt to protect them from the big evil monster. And when I caught up to them, it turned out that I was that monster. I didn't tell the girls that I was expelled from the family instead of them. In the morning, we went to school as usual. It was my wish as well, a kind of the last one, like they give to a sentenced person. There, I also had someone to say goodbye to, and it was necessary to arrange a couple of things that I kept forgetting about. And first of all, I wanted to make sure that when I left, my sisters wouldn't be bullied and tormented again. And for this purpose, I needed to have a proper talk with those classmates who consider themselves superior to others. And that was nice, for I no longer had to hide, intrigue, or pretend that I was just talking nonsense. Yes, it was a big surprise for many that a cute girl with big eyes, a kawaii one, as the guy from the parallel class said, could talk like a port leader and be quite good at real fighting. Well, why? It made no sense to pretend any longer, and it wasn't my fault that some people could understand words better after you gave them a black eye. The class, and the rest of the guys in the school, got the idea. Now the girls were looked at with fear and respect, for no one wanted to get into trouble with me. By the end of the day, the girls were completely confused, and only batted their eyes when some kids greeted them politely. But it was not the end. It was just kind of a warm-up before the hardest conversation. I had to talk to Harry, at least to explain to him why we couldn't be together. Being a convinced coward, I put the conversation away for later, until I realized that the lessons were over, and Harry was about to go home. Then everything in me woke up, everything that I diligently put to sleep, and my feet carried me to say goodbye. Harry agreed to talk, but he looked the same way as my mother. That is, sharply and attentively. Not a trace of feelings, no matter what they were. I felt terrible. I even thought whether it was worth it to let my hair down if he didn't even care. But my personal conscience told me that it was worth doing. Unlike my mother, I wasn't going to repent before Harry. My uncut story hardly interested him, and this fact reduced the time of our conversation significantly. But the reason why I had a quarrel with him and left as his enemy, well, honesty is a great weapon anyway, for it hurts so much that the bullets can only dream of. While I was telling him how I had followed Jackson and been restoring justice, Harry was silent. But when the story got to blackmail, it seemed that he had been caught up with emotions too. He tried to say something, grabbed my hands, but I did the right thing. I said it didn't really change anything, because there would be no we anymore, because I came to say goodbye, and not even for the sake of myself or him, but just for the sake of my sisters. It was important for me that somebody looked after them, and a long-distance relationship? No, it was pointless, and it wouldn't work. Even if I suddenly went crazy and really wanted it, and I did not want it. I did not want a long-distance relationship, but it seemed that Harry had thought about something else again. We broke up peacefully, even probably as friends. Well, at least, we repeated it to each other no less than 3 times. He promised to look after the girls and wished me luck. And he left. It was really painful to watch him go away and do nothing to stop him. But I told him the truth. Distant relationships were not for me. And smart books advise to cut off love ties at once, because then they sprout in the heart and hurt. At home, I looked at my room once again, then at the yard where we had played and had a barbecue, then at the small garden in the corner, which my mother had planted for me and my sisters. And then I went outside, where my mother was already waiting for me in her car. We nodded at each other, and she helped me to put my suitcase in the trunk, and said that I had to go. And then, with the same stoned face, she started the engine of the car, and we moved on. I looked at the Smith's house through the rearview window for the last time. I was very, very sad that I was leaving, and would never go back there again. My mother peered on me silently in the mirror. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the continuation of the story. Hello, everybody. You should watch the previous episodes, if you haven't already done so. And my name's Emma, and my days in the Smiths family are over. Or aren't they? We drove for a long time, but I didn't notice, because tears were pouring down my cheeks without stopping. Because of stupid tears, I couldn't even see the road, and I certainly didn't follow the time. I just knew that sooner or later the car would stop, and my happy life would finally end. But still, it was a little strange that we were driving for so long. Yes, my boarding school was in the countryside and quite far from the Smith's house, but not on the other side of the state. I just couldn't ask why. My throat was suffocated with spasms, so there were only some stupid sobs instead of clear speech. And then the car stopped, and I woke up from my self-pity immediately, because there was something outside the window. To be honest, I didn't know at all what was outside, but the beautiful glass building clearly didn't look like a boarding school. It was more like an expensive office or something like that. I looked at my mother. She made a strange hand gesture, like clean up and come out already. I nodded and opened the glove compartment to get some napkins. We came out in front of this strange building, and Mom stepped forward in silence. I followed her like I was tied to her. I was silent too, but I constantly looked around because there was a lot to look at. The building was fully made of glass and it was very high. It had no less than 60 floors. And if you looked closely, you could see people running and fussing in every window, like an anthill in the maximum approximation. Inside too, everything was expensive and stylish. Black reception desks, marble floors, and the elevator which was finished with gold panels. In fact, rather painted, but it looked epic. We got out on the 20th floor. Mom waved at someone, shouted something deep into the long corridor, and turned towards the big oak door right in the center. I had already understood that for some reason, I was honored to visit her Holy of Holies, the office where my mother made money and ran her own large corporation. But what for? To show me what I had lost? Well, probably. She didn't think about anything like that. She just dropped in before taking me back to the boarding school. My mother looked around in the office, took out some big box and put it in front of me, and she sat down at the table and immersed herself into the papers. I sat down on the edge of a chair and looked around. In fact, my mother's office was no different from the same one in the Smith's house. Well, maybe it was a bit larger, but still, there were the same strict lines. A lot of metal and catalogs with folders all over the wall. There were papers in the box as well. I looked at them outside of the corner of my eye, but I didn't understand anything. Besides, the behavior rules had not yet been canceled, and I was polite enough not to check out the contents of the box. It turned out that I did so in vain, for when my mother was distracted from her work, she asked me why I was sitting with such a sad face and doing nothing. After all, she had clearly showed me the scope of work. I had to look through, sort, and study everything that was in the box. I looked at her like an owl, with big round eyes. My mother looked at me and laughed. Not mockingly. There was an absolutely ordinary, warm mother's laugh. And then she came up to me and gave me a hug. And then we had another time of revelations. But this time, it was not me who spoke, but her. And she told me something that I had never even thought about. It turned out that my mother had known at first sight what I was like. And, of course, she knew that she would have problems with my upbringing. But she decided to try, and as a result, she only had to watch me hissing, spitting, trying to intrigue, but at the same time gradually losing ground. She also guessed about my affair with my sisters and brother at once, but she didn't interfere, because it was a lesson not just for him. It was high time for William to learn to defend his opinion. The girls really grew up too pampered and deedless, and there was prepared a very special place for me in the family. In short, my mother deliberately waited for the moment when I almost cracked and decided to act. Of course, no one was going to send their children, they were there for a long time, to the boarding school, including me. But getting on nerves for the sake of upbringing, well, actually, my mother succeeded, and my talent surprised her. At my small age, I knew how to think and embody what I thought was right, and so many adults were tricked by my intrigues as babies. The only thing I didn't have enough to become a good businesswoman, or maybe a politician, in the future was education. So, my mother said from that moment on, I would work at her firm. Of course, in my free time from school, and then I would go to university to pump up my skills. And then I had to work for the benefit of my family again, for the talent should be brought to light, and preferably for the benefit of the family. And in the evening, when all the papers had been already studied and sorted out, my mother and I returned home, and my bad actions fell on my head again. To begin with, I apologized to Danny and Chloe, not like the last time, but in a real way, with a detailed analysis of my and their actions, like, what you shouldn't do and what if. The girls got the idea and promised to learn to think with their own heads. Well, I thought they would definitely succeed, for without regular bullying at school and my intrigues, they had quite good potential for two. Then it was more difficult. I shook out my piggy bank and suffered a little over the fact that I was left without my money. And then I went to the pawn shop. Fortunately, the collection of William's cars hadn't been bought yet, and I managed to take everything, although the cunning seller demanded twice as much from me as he had paid. William was happy. His treasure had returned to him, and that's all. We lost our brother for the whole weekend. He was rubbing his cars, placing them by height and make, playing something there. Well, he was a boy, but he was happy and smiling again. And then I came to the school and realized that there were small beers before. The biggest difficulties were waiting for me ahead, and looked closely at me out of round glasses, out of Harry's eyes. I said goodbye. I actually made it clear to him that I didn't need him, and I needed him very much. But I thought that I no longer had any chances and right to communicate with him. As my sisters told me later, my strange communication with Harry was noticed by everyone. And they laughed, for we were circling around each other like dogs at garbage cans. But neither of us was ready to come nearer and talk. After all, the guys from the club and the twins were tired of looking at our gloomy faces. They caught us one by one, yelled at us, and then locked us in a classroom for club meetings. And they added that until we dealt with all our problems, we wouldn't be released. We had a quarrel. Well, because it all didn't work. If I or he had come to the negotiations by ourselves, then okay, but in such a way, instead of just apologizing or falling down on my knees and begging Harry for a fresh start, I thought it would be a great idea to yell at him and blame him for everything. Well, I yelled at him, and he yelled at me, and then we yelled at each other, calling each other names and remembering all the terrible things that had happened between us. But these insidious people who had locked us up refused to open the door anyway. And then I started talking, and this time I told him everything. And I told him about my own feelings, which I tried to fight. It was a shame. A couple of times I tried not to cry. Then again I started shouting at him and calling him a stupid deer. And after that, I sat at the nearest desk and started staring at the wall. And then I realized that I was being hugged, and for quite a long time, considering that Harry's t-shirt was wet from my tears. Romance, damn it. Apparently, I learned to fill the world with tears from the twins. Harry said that he had always believed in me, and he knew that I wasn't playing, that I just couldn't understand how I felt, and then I just tried to protect everyone from myself. In fact, I wasn't a monster, and it would be nice to let people decide for the future whether they wanted to protect themselves from me. We made up, and it was much more wonderful than all my revelations to myself, though it was completely illogical. Now we continue to learn and just live. Finally, the sisters stopped hiding from danger and started thinking. And given that there are two of them, and they are not planning to separate, the school will soon be in great turmoil because of changing the school authorities. William grew older as well and realized that he needs to be able to defend himself instead of relying on others. I taught him various necessary words and self-defense a bit. We haven't become friends, of course, but he is also cool, and he can be a good person if raised correctly. As my mother planned, I work at her firm as a kind of secretary. Mom sometimes even consults with me, and always emphasizes that I am very good in such cases. It is a pleasure. Me and Harry have big plans for the future. He even tried to talk about a wedding a couple of times, but I reminded him that we are still children, and first have to grow up and learn. Well, I feel certain that he'll succeed, for he's already being invited to all more or less famous universities. And I got one simple idea. You can prepare as much as you like that you don't care about people and play the part of the villain, but in reality, all villains only want one thing: to be loved. Subscribe to the channel. We still have a lot of interesting stories ahead.